let's kick off. Welcome to Wealth 4.0 on a mission to humanise wealth. My name's Chris Mills and I'm here with my friend and colleague Andy. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself and kick off?
Yes, hello. Hello, Chris. That was a lovely introduction to yourself and me. Back to you.
I think that what we're doing today, we're on a mission to pioneer, stimulate and champion the principles of a new blueprint for investment. Most importantly, that benefits investors, customers or consumers and society as a whole. And we're here to humanise wealth. And I think to do that, we need to revisit the inherited and established rules, challenge things, look at the regulations that govern the current status quo in the investment landscape. So, we believe that what's emerged organically over time is really ripe for innovation. We've had scores of years of building up an investment universe, a wealth and asset management landscape. People talk about cottage industries and how we've developed that over time. But I think now it's time to look at the business model as a whole. We want to look at the ways that it's, resisted innovation. And given the circumstances we find ourselves now with COVID-19, the time has really come for fresh perspectives and ideas to be injected into that landscape. So how do we do that? Where do we start? We've decided that each week we're going to provoke aspects of that investment ecosystem and ask why, what and how things could and should be different. So we're going to pay particular attention to where can't and won't arguments for investments hold firm, so the barriers to that, and see if we can topple those arguments with, let's call it, scientific 21st century thinking. I guess all my guests here are worried now about being entirely 21st century and scientific, but we'll get over that hurdle as we move along. And I think that what we're going to try and do is to look at a number of aspects of this. We're big borrow and steal. We'll take stimulus from parallel businesses, from mavericks, wildcards and other models further afield. We'll look at new and exciting frontiers of investments that are being evolved and proposed over time. We're going to see things that align and excite with those goals from that Wealth 4.0 requirements. We're going to see all of those ingredients and how we can make the best for the future. And each week we'll speak to experts, advisors, thought provokers who are passionate about those ideas, who have thought deeply about these issues. And I think we're going to look at plumb their depths of creativity and change and see how we can motivate and excite and change this industry. So it's all about, if I get philosophical, we're going to look back on what went wrong in 2008, what we've learned by 2020, and look ahead to the horizons of 2025 and beyond. Everyone happy?
Sounds fantastic, Chris. Very good.
Anything else?
And I wonder if it's worth explaining to our listener in Cheltenham why we've got the language around Wealth 4.0 and why this particular series might be called I'm Thinking.
Yeah, I think for a long time now, I've worked in this industry for 20 odd years, scarily. And I think that there have been the rhetoric of change has continued over that time period. And frankly, you get to a point where you might have Wealth 0.1 or Wealth 1.0 and Wealth 2.0, etc. And I think what we're really trying to do is to make a step change in thinking. I think we're trying not to simply iterate, to simply improve one step at a time. It's actually to try and think, where do we want to get to? What's the end goal? What's the end journey of this? And then how do we work back from that and develop that blueprint, that journey, that plan? So ambitiously, we decided to skip 3 and move to Wealth 4.0 and then come backwards to that. It also is helpful that we've got a little bit of an idea about, some of the big picture ideas of what that also means. So we're going to try and think about looking also over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be covering 12 topics. And each topic, we want to be having 4 scintillating experts. We're building up to that. We've got 3 right now and 1 passive. We'll get to 4 for each topic. And obviously 2 try-hard hosts in yourself and me, Andy. And I think what we're planning is in 4 months, we want to put together that blueprint. So each of those weeks we'll be putting together a portion of that blueprint that will be built up over time. And guess what? The really big, hairy, audacious goal at the end, we have the blueprint. In 4 years, let's have built an example of Wealth 4.0 that is live, commercial, competitive, and delivering.
Yeah, and that 4.0 4 years horizon isn't something that's fixed in stone. It's something that could be brought forward so that in 4 years' time, it's already up and running. And with a bit of momentum and energy, we can put something into the world. And that's something that you and I have been speaking about for a long time, Chris. And it's great to finally get going and get all these guys in on the chat.
No, I think you're right. I think there's always been ambition to step things forward, and we're setting out a blueprint. We're setting out that big, hairy, audacious goal. It's a target that I think is entirely feasible, but we need to plan appropriately, use the best thinking, data-led thinking to start to do that. So I'm excited to kick off.
Let's go. I wonder if it was worth then, let's hear from all of our guests, our star guests on this exciting first episode. And if we get from you just a few moments, everyone, about who you are and a little bit about your background, just to set a bit of context about you as individuals, so our listeners understand your frame of reference, whether you are inside the industry, looking out into the world, or outside of the industry, looking into this particular topic. Your relationship with wealth, because again, that will stimulate our discussions. And in the spirit of going first, I will go first very quickly. So, hello. Chris was very modest. He sort of skipped over his background. I'll expand upon mine just a little bit, is that I've spent the last 20 odd years in front of people. I started life as a teacher. I then went to the bright lights of marketing and innovation and strategy in London. And I've cut my teeth in facilitating the creative process. And that could have been through pharmaceutical drugs all the way to chocolate bars, from airlines to marketing credit cards on the other side of the world, to fish paste in Norway, all the way to banking strategy. So I'm never the person with the answer. I'm there to design the conditions where answers will happen. And the team and I are on a mission to inspire. And one of the topics that's always fascinated me and seems to be the last stronghold of creativity and innovation is wealth management. And I'm sure that there's lots of innovative people within the industry, and I'm sure that there's lots of innovations that go on behind the scenes. But something that always inspired me was breaking some of those inherited rules around investment and wealth. And my interest was piqued because I'm now of the age where I've got some money, I've inherited some wealth. I needed to put it somewhere. I wanted to go and do something with it. And one day I found myself in a grey room speaking to a grey man in a grey suit who handed me grey pieces of paper. And I thought, this can't be what it's all about. There must be something there that's interesting. So I'm going to hang on to some of my provocations for later in the show. Chris will roll his eyes when he hears I've dug out these ideas from the ideas graveyard, Chris. And one of them, remember that one? Stock it money. Yeah. Excellent. So So I'll get all of those out, but I'm here from the outside in to help our guests provoke some of the experts, because I'm deeply fascinated by this, and I really want my kids to grow up into a world where they have access, I guess, to wealth in all its forms, and they can be contributors to it. So that's my relationship with the topic, an agent provocateur. Let's go right to left on my screen. So we've got Trevor Goodman first. So who are you and what do you do, Trevor?
Hi, everybody. I'm Trevor Goodman. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've worked for 25 years in the asset management industry, primarily in a legal role, but also in other capacities as well, in terms of leading projects and getting involved with the organisations that I have worked for from a more business and strategic perspective. I've got a particular interest in technology and efficiency. I've been involved in various blockchain consortiums looking at how you could, for example, take the traditional fund structure, break that down into a more virtual structure, and bring that in a more democratic way to end investors, in the hope that that would bring down costs and also bring different investment opportunities for people as well. So that's something I'm very interested in. I've obviously been part of various organizations which, when you look from the inside, you can see there are things that are difficult to change given systems, processes, how things are organized. And I think that with a little bit of creative thinking, and I don't profess to have the answers, but I think with some creative thinking, there are other ways of delivering better products and better solutions to end retail investors. And those are the people that we should really be looking out for. And that's clear from the regulatory environment. It's clear from the social environment as well that we're in. So I'm very keen to be part of that and to help drive some of the change that I feel is needed.
Thank you, Trevor. Leapfrogging from one Trevor to the next, we land on Mr. Trevor Hunt. Hello.
Hey, Andy. Hi, everyone. My name's Trevor Hunt. I am a CTO advisor for a company called Behind Every Cloud. I have spent 30 years in financial services technology, so I've been on the inside. I've done both technology leadership roles, but also operations roles as well. I've been a COO, registered with the regulator, and therefore have been a customer of technology as well as somebody who's responsible for delivering it. So recently I decided to leave the industry and a little bit like you were saying, Andy, is start to think about how it could be changed. It's a very traditional industry, very much set in its ways. And being a technologist, I want to see how I can apply some of the latest technologies to some of these very traditional investment management processes. So the acronym I'm thinking is investment management thinking, right? How can we change some of those processes, some of those 30, 40-year-old systems that are sitting in these monoliths of organizations? The second thing is, what does Behind Every Cloud do? We are a cloud advisory firm. What we do is we try and bring the latest technology to firms, and there's been a clear shift in the last 3 or 4 years of moving things to the cloud. It used to be the case that you'd build a data center, you'd have a big technology team, and you'd develop software, run systems, but everything is now shifting, and particularly during this last few months, as a result of COVID, into this cloud delivered model using tools like Microsoft Teams, but also in terms of hosting some of your business applications. What we do is we try to determine who are the best of breed for each of the different parts of technology that you can think about in that space. So it could be telephony, it could be your network, it could be something a little bit more progressive like AI, for example, and how you'd apply that in a cloud model. So this is where I think Wealth 4.0 comes along as well, because people talk about the fourth industrial revolution, or Industrial Revolution 4.0. I think that's a term that came out of the World Economic Forum like in the last 10 years. So aligning wealth, investment management with the technology to deliver something that really resonates with people today. Now, I'm obviously being somebody more senior. I have children that are now adults. In fact, one is getting married this year, and they are becoming investors. So like you, Andy, I want to help to make sure that they're making smart choices about the investments that they're beginning to make at the start of their careers. And with that in mind, for the last 6 months, I've been closely looking at crypto assets and new technologies like blockchain, because I strongly believe that over the next 10 years, we're going to see a shift from the existing practices into more distributed technologies like blockchain that will enable a more fairer society, and one that enables you to invest in things that you want as opposed to what you're being told you have to do. Anyway, that's me.
Oh, thank you, Trevor. And it was nice to get your language around I am and I'm thinking, and further context behind 4.0. And already there's bunches of topics that are coming out from what you said. We've all mentioned customers, and I know Sarah has a particular passion for who is that customer, but also there's topics there that we can look forward to discussing in the next few weeks about, invest in crypto rather than, I don't know, some orange farm in the bottom of Chile. All right, Sarah, hello, welcome along.
Hello. I'm so glad it wasn't ladies first. It's so old school. So my name's Sarah Speak. I've spent the last 25 years in commercial roles, always with a tech bent. So I started my career in tech publishing. I spent 7 years at Google, the first 4 of which were as technology sales director. The latter 3 were as strategic marketing director. I was global CMO of an MVNO called Truephone, launched their IoT solutions and Apple eSIM strategic partnership. So as you can probably tell, I get very excited about tech, about data, about analytics, but only where it's tackled from a genuinely customer-centric point of view. So whether that is B2B or B2C or B2B2C, is almost irrelevant. I still don't think that so many organisations are sufficiently good at genuinely putting the customer at the heart of their decision making from the board down. So I set up my own business, having consciously uncoupled from the corporate world about 18 months ago, and I now help clients align their board, business and brand, and that is very, very much with a laser sharp view on some of the evidence that you cited, Trevor. How can we really use technology to ensure that people are making smarter decisions? So in terms of this space, I'm a fellow outsider in addition to Andy, but I would love us to get to a space where by the time my children are making decisions, there is a level of perceived authenticity, trust, and accessibility that doesn't feel intuitive at the moment. That's me.
Thank you, Sarah. Good introductions there from everyone. It's very hard to kind of cram all of the things that you're passionate about into a coherent narrative in only a few moments, coupled with the distractions of people coming through my front door and planes going overhead. There is an actual plane going overhead from Heathrow right now, everyone. The economy is on the move. Chris, we've made our way from left to right across the squares on my screen. I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think in terms of our agenda and what we're really trying to do now, the next thing that we want to focus on is that inside-out view. We've mentioned it a couple of times. I'm only a 20-year veteran in the industry, so I pale into insignificance beside the combined experience of Trevor's. And I think it'd be worthwhile just to think a little bit about how we describe the industry we're thinking of changing. So I'm wondering if it's a good idea. It gets very complicated very quickly, but I'm wondering if I can try to define some of the terms. What are we talking about when we look at wealth? I'm thinking of it in a very broad sense, because as every industry, there are factions and tribes and semi-religious fights about, you know, the terms that we're talking about. But I'm talking about wealth in a very broad sense. We're looking at how that whole industry responds to the end consumer, but all of the layers in between. So I don't know, Trevor G, are you able to capture from your perspective some of the simple building blocks in that landscape? What, you know, where do you think from, let's just say from the consumer, what are some of the other players in that market to actually, who make up their potential investment? Where does that process come, you know, begin and end?
Yeah, and that's a good starting point, because there is a chain there, and I think that's really interesting to start to analyze, because at the one end you have sort of the asset management firms, the product manufacturers that certainly I've worked for over the 25 years that I've been in the industry, and at the other end of the chain you have the end retail investor. But there are different players along the chain, and it's maybe not always that obvious to the end retail investor who the product manufacturer is. Now, I think that's changing. That greater transparency it's clearly been mandated from a regulatory perspective, and it's been required by investors as well. But there's still different steps along the chain. So the average retail investor is probably going to start off maybe by talking to their bank, and then maybe being asked to speak to a financial advisor within the bank. But then perhaps they want a second opinion, so they talk to an independent financial advisor. And then everybody's within those groups, you've got different interests and stakes in terms of different products you can offer and sell, probably different fee bases as well in terms of what those end investors can receive based on the deals that those entities have done with the product manufacturer. And that's before you even look at platforms and other people that might also be sitting along the chain as well. So I think at the moment it's a very intermediated chain. There are a number of asset managers that do go more direct to the end investor, but most of them probably operate more of an intermediated network in terms of not really facing off to the end investor. And that creates its obvious difficulties, because sometimes it's very hard for the asset manager then to actually get that feedback from the retail investor around how they're doing. You know, that's before you even start looking at the product itself. Because you're going through chains of people to get to that end investor. And there's obviously value for people in owning those end investors along the chain. So sometimes they're not that willing to give up the data. So I think with all the technology that we're talking about, and Trevor's spoken about, and the different approaches that Sarah's mentioned as well, I think there is really an opportunity here to really find out what are those pain points for those end retail investors? What are they actually looking for? And then how do you design a client journey and then appropriate products to meet the needs of those end investors? I think traditionally, the asset managers have probably started from, well, we've got a portfolio manager here who's got a really great idea around a product that they want to start managing or selling, as opposed to really thinking about it from the end investor point of view. First of all, what is it that end investor needs? So I think that shift needs to happen. I think it probably will be accelerated as well by the fee compression in the industry. It's costing more and more to actually operate products as well. So some of that intermediation is probably going to come under pressure, because there's going to be less that can be paid to them. But then also there's going to be more and more price competition. We've seen that already on the actual products you're offering. So, there's going to be rationalization. You've got to get to a position where you're very clear in terms of what is it that you're offering to those end investors. And, I think that chain that I tried to describe is going to come under some pressure as we go forward over the next couple of years.
So there's some of the building blocks that I know the industry uses. They talk about manufacturing, which is what manufacturing of portfolios or fund managers and that part of the industry. And then there's a so-called distribution of that through a number of intermediaries. And there's often, I guess, there can be a split, or players in the market who play both roles, or maybe choose one or other. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Hunt, I'm just interested that you talked about your son starting investing. where did he start? Did he ask his dad where to put his money? Did he go to the platforms that Trevor was talking about? I guess the Hargreaves Lansdowns of the world, that sort of world. Where did he look?
Yeah, he's a very smart lad, actually. I'm proud to say he's the service delivery manager for Great Ormond Street Hospital, first of all. So he's done very well for himself, and we're all very proud. He's very level-headed, and we were having a conversation the other day. He worked for Unilever for about 5 years. He did an apprenticeship with them and then got a degree out of it as well. And so he's on the Unilever pension. But when he came out of Unilever and started looking around, getting ready to get married and whatever, he started to ask me about, Dad, what do you think about investments?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to have the conversation about crypto assets, but it's something that he knew about already, right? It's very much in his space. He reads about these things on the Reddit forums that he's in. And so he just went and bought himself a digital wallet. I can't remember what these things are called, the particular thing he got, but he's now investing 150 quid a month of his salary into Bitcoin. He's made that choice himself. It's not advice from his father. It is him being sensible, I think, about which way asset valuations are going to go in the future. I think we're at a very, very important time. What I'd like to do actually, Chris, though, is to maybe let's put some basic building blocks in place about what we're talking about, because we're covering a number of different topics here. You talked there about distribution. There's clearly the retail channel and there's the institutional channels. So asset managers have to service those and they come with different requirements. There's also the different products themselves, right? There's active and passive, very different in terms of what they try to achieve. And it's really interesting to get the context of where the asset and wealth management industry has come from and where it is today, and why it's difficult to change it as well. Which, being long-term investors, as asset managers typically are, they're averse to change, right? They want to make a decision, they want to get a return, and they want to be recompensed for making those right decisions, delivering a return to their investors. Now, you and I know, Chris, that what's happening with the market has been going on for the last 20 years. And it's this barbell analogy that BCG talks about, where you have the big scale players at one end, and you have the smaller niche players at the bottom end. The big scale players are your BlackRocks, Vanguards. They're now in the 4, 5, 6 trillion of assets. And they've got there not just from active management, but largely from passive management, right? A lot of index tracking money is going in there. A lot of retail money's gone in there, and they're grown to a huge size and scale. At the other end are the niche active managers, and they provide a different way of achieving a return through alpha. Now, the reason that asset managers find it difficult to change is because over the last 10, 15 years, there's been so many mergers and acquisitions that have happened. And what this does is it layers complexity onto what should be a pretty simple process, right? I want to make an investment decision. I want that executed. I want that asset held in custody. But when you've got two asset managers that come together, they're running different platforms, right? One might be outsourced, one might be insourced, and you've got to bring these things together. So there's some really tough decisions about who's in charge, right? Who's going to really be the one who's going to take the lead? Is it the bigger one? Is it the one with the loudest voice? You end up in these kind of situations. And unfortunately, by the time you've started to do that integration, or you're halfway through, or you're nearly finished the integration, then the next one comes along. And so you haven't quite finished that one. So, we've got to add this one as well. And if you pull up the hood and look inside an asset manager, the infrastructure that they're running, it's very rare that you find a truly global, simple operating platform. You're typically finding that it's overlaid by all these different sets of infrastructure that need to support passive and active products, but also different distribution channels, but also different operating models that have been there for different periods of time. So that's the complexity of what you're trying to change.
But it's interesting, I know you're absolutely right. Let's understand the building blocks and the history, but it still strikes me as particularly interesting that your son, as an example, knew nothing about that, and yet has no desire or is not motivated to even make the connection to that legacy infrastructure, to that legacy business. He was much more self-service and much more looking at it himself. And so that first step of interaction with an industry was made irrespective of legacy or infrastructure. It was made because of a need that Sarah said it earlier on about accessibility. It presumably wasn't accessible.
It's accessibility, Chris, absolutely, but it's also trust. What does he trust? Does he trust a financial services industry that is really looking after itself? Right. If you go back to the credit crisis and where we are today, there's a massive disconnect that's happening between the reality of the economics of companies and what the markets are actually doing. And so, he's a smart kid, and he's thinking to himself, I don't believe what I'm seeing here. I'd much prefer to talk to my trusted circle, which might be a Reddit group, or it might be, some other social media group of people that he's regularly interacting with, and thinking, right, that's where my trust is. So I'm therefore more willing to put my money where I know it can be trusted.
So do you think, given, I guess, a manufacturing engine, a distribution engine, you talked about the different types of products and services, and I'll come back to Trevor G. Do you think that we are seeing an old business model with certain trust issues sort of just slowly atrophying? Is this, we've got a new version coming into play? Is that what's required, or is it something that should cover all of the market? Is it an age question, or are all customers asking the same thing and we're just not delivering the right answers, Trevor?
I don't know, Chris. I think I'm not sure that I would say it's definitely an age thing, because I think there's different people with different views across society. I think everybody's looking for products to help them with the solutions that they're looking, for the problems that they're looking to solve. Whether it's investing for first-time buyer for property, which is incredibly difficult now given the amount you have to put down as a deposit is much more, or somebody saving for school fees, or somebody just investing for retirement. There's lots of different reasons why people invest, and I think, given Trevor's point around the financial crisis, I think there have been some trust issues with the industry as a whole. And when you layer onto that the economic situation where it's very difficult to get the returns that you're looking for, and particularly there are different people looking for different things, whether it's income or growth, and it's very hard necessarily to predict which sectors are going to be successful or which companies are going to be successful, because I think we are now at another inflection point given everything that's been going on. I think that's why people are questioning more and saying, are these traditional types of investments right for me? Am I getting sort of am I able to see the visibility of what's out there for me? And actually, given that I am maybe more familiar with different types of technology, maybe I'm more comfortable in being a little bit more self-service. I mean, I still think people are going to look for some advice or guided advice, but maybe we are at the point now where people are much more comfortable, doing things almost remotely. And, the COVID environment has been, probably a really good example of where we've had to do a lot of things ourselves, sort of detached from our normal sort of formal social groups, or the ability to actually go and have a meeting with somebody to have that discussion. And obviously Zoom and other things help with some of those conversations, but maybe people are more comfortable doing a little bit more research on their own. I think, though, my concern is that I'm not sure that financial education has kept pace with a number of those things. And I think there's an angle there that would need to be supported and looked at. But I think we're at the point now where a lot of those conditions are coming together, which I think will help to drive that change, whether it's from firms themselves, whether it's from investors themselves. I think we're at an interesting point where there is a new opportunity to design different business models and products that actually address the needs that people have.
Thank you. What I find fascinating, Andy, I'm going to hand over to you in a moment, is that we have just been talking about the industry and how it's built up and grown. And I think we must have used 55 terms for which you probably need a definition. We're talking, it's a language that we've dealt with over the last 20 years. And, we talk about active or passive, and frankly, there are arguments about what that means. We talk about, distributors, manufacturers, and you're thinking, what are you distributing and manufacturing? Versus, getting a package delivered through drone or whatever. And it's just, I think we've just, from an inside out perspective, we've probably just proven the point that we have a little microcosm of language and terminology that is distinct or impenetrable for the customer. So
yeah, it was insightful and interesting in that last 10 minutes. And now that we've raised it, when we all listen back to this, you'll notice the particular types of language that you use to describe your particular world. And Sarah, I can see you moving back and forth on your chair. Yeah, I'll do it now. Don't worry. But one of the things that Trevor Goodman ended on then was the level of financial education hasn't kept pace. And one of the first things I think the outsider in point of view would like to champion is that there's a responsibility, I think, for both sides of the wealth to educate people on what's involved here. Because no one has told me at my 47th year on the planet what this is, what it does, why it works, and why it matters. And it's interesting that we're just assumed that we're supposed to know these things and get punished if we don't, and we're rewarded if we happen upon it.
And Andy, it's really hard. Can I give an example? So I've just been working on the value delivered report for the funds of the company that I work for, and we're having to explain the difference between value investing and growth investing. And those are terms of, that we just take for granted. But when you actually try to explain that in simple terms and break it down so it's understandable, it is so hard to do. And I'll be honest, I don't think we've got to publish ours on Monday. I don't think we've got there, and I don't think we've solved it. But there are lots of things like that which actually don't mean much to people. They just care about, has my product delivered? What have I paid for? What have I got? And those sorts of ways of describing those products don't play into doing that.
Yeah. Okay. So nomenclature and description will definitely be a topic. Right, Sarah. I know that if we were to lift the lid on your particular perspective on the world, the Pandora's box of provocation will come out. But for this sort of pilot episode, I'd be really interested in hearing the 3 or 4 things that you think are worth exploring, up for grabs, immediate provocations to the established world of wealth and investment and this entire universe that we want to explore. So what's on your mind, either right now or has just recently been stimulated by Trevor and Trevor?
Yeah, so I think the issue around nomenclature and financial education is a very, very valid one, and not least in an era where the end retail customer is voting increasingly with their feet. If they don't feel that the organisation that they're dealing with is being honest and authentic, and in some cases throughout COVID, I think a number have come across as mercenary and opportunistic, which has turned people off enormously. I think that there's a healthy level of cynicism with the end user around, where do those fees go? Who takes the cut and at what stage? I've gone through a process of, the example that you cited earlier, Chris, is somebody may go to their bank. Is their local bank branch necessarily the best equipped to talk about investments? I would challenge that. However, in the absence of accessible, proactive financial education in the investor space, and what should I do, what could I do, I think it's an obvious local port of call. So I think there's an increasing level of customers voting with their feet, a healthy level of cynicism, and also a level of perceived intimidation around areas, whether it's language related or product related, that they just fundamentally don't understand. So in my case, I happen to be married to an independent financial advisor who specialises in tax and investment advice. So I don't have to worry, because he can give me the top line information that I need. It's all about potential results in a language that I understand. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is trying to deliver a level of probably better personalised products and services via a means that the end user can track them, access them very, very easily using, I hope, ultimately non-siloed integrated tech platforms, where I want to be able to understand very visually via a dashboard of some description exactly where all my investments are and what each of those mean in aggregate, without having to go to potentially multiple different ports of call that mean the onus is on me to be in charge of that discovery, when frankly I'm not really interested in going through the process. I just want to know what the end results are. So I see, on a positive front, I see an opportunity there for the industry to leapfrog some of the mistakes that other sectors have made in not understanding how critical it is at M&A stage to actually prioritise the integration of people, processes and systems, so that fundamentally whatever one is delivering for the end user is personalised, and using the phrase that you coined at the beginning of this, Chris, feels like you're better humanising the industry, which at the moment feels a bit far away from me, and therefore probably not as accessible as it needs to be. So Trevor, I'm not surprised that your son has opted to engage in part in a way that I've just outlined, i.e. he's in control, he understands, and he can see immediately via technology what he's investing on a monthly basis and what his potential returns are. So I see a huge opportunity by unifying, simplifying and humanising, and I don't underestimate the multitude of challenges that lie within that because of the supply chain that you've outlined. But I do think there's an opportunity to make the industry feel more accessible and more human than it currently feels in terms of end user perception. But I think that's an impossibility unless you get the tech right.
Okay, and coming off that, so when you were finishing there about humanising,
yeah,
something that you just said then, and also Trevor mentioned, the people save for particular life stages. You mentioned the first house, school fees and retirement. These are perhaps traditional milestones in people's developing lives that they would like to invest and save for. My provocations are perhaps those are getting blurred now. The way that we are living, certainly over the last 100 days, has been interrupted, but I wonder if the sort of the nuclear family of living in a home and we all go and invest in a house, that might be up for grabs now at a society level. It could be that blended learning is going to become an increasing part of our everyday lives now, and we don't have to save up in such particular fashions for education. And retirement might be something that never happens to some of us. I can personally see myself working until my heart stops because I want to. I believe I want to.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the industry can't challenge itself and look upon the particularly inherited belief systems that it has about what people save for and why. That might lead to new insight-led products and services. And the second one is there was a particular journey that maybe Trevor's son went through, but certainly I went through, is before purchasing a particular wealth product, I was given lots of glossy literature that felt very friendly, like a mobile phone. And there was lots of pictures of people that looked a little like me drinking coffee and holding laptops. As soon as I bought the product, I then got a dearth of incredibly difficult documents, and I'm a smart man, but I haven't read them and I don't read them. So there's this sort of literature communication thing going on that I think the industry could do some quick wins around. And then the final one, and these aren't to be answered now, these are just provocations in my head, Sarah, that other outside-in guests might want to riff with, are the barriers to investment. And I don't believe that anyone doesn't understand the concept of wealth. They might have different language to it, but intuitively, I think humans understand how much they have compared to someone next to them. And particularly, I wonder if there's opportunities there to invest for $1 a day, rather than I can only start to invest if I have $100,000. So if we could reduce the barriers to entry, change the literature, and perhaps challenge some of those insights, we might end up with something even more human than what we have now.
Just to build on what Andrew just said, it's really interesting, because I would argue that the sort of blended learning, blended living model is already here.
Yeah.
There are, at least in larger cities across EMEA, where, perfect example very close to me here in London, more affordable housing has been built with communal living and social areas, so to enable first-time buyers to just get their foot on the property ladder. So, you know, the residential equivalent of a WeWork is an appalling example at the moment, but the residential equivalent of that kind of shared space to reduce costs. So that's already changing. I think, you know, adding to your life stages now, I couldn't agree more, are changing so phenomenally. And when one considers that by 2050, 1 in 5 of us will be over 60 and living significantly longer, you know, the investment choices throughout one's life in the knowledge that we will live significantly longer. We will, to your point, Andy, some of us choose to, some of us have to work for significantly longer, means there's a real blurring, in my view, of what used to be classic, buy my first home, you know, go back to being a student. I'm still with the bank that sucked me in Freshers Week. So you know, one of the other interesting elements for me of this behaviour is that people do become very, very loyal customers if the institutions or groups in question service them appropriately and listen to their feedback, and therefore make them feel that there's a very, very good match. But there aren't those classic life stage decisions in terms of investing in first home. Mostly because economically people aren't at the same age that maybe we were 30 odd years ago to be able to even consider buying their first home or getting married or whatever.
So a lot there already, Chris, on the inside out and outside in point of view. We started, don't know, 15, 20 minutes ago, we were getting to the nuts and bolts of actual the wealth management mechanisms. And now we're talking about society and how it could be moving. So this is going to promise to be a hell of a series and a hell of a blueprint, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I think I was just going to ask to end this first section is to ask people for a bit of a score, you know, see what they think. So, you know, Trevor H, you know, how do you rate the industry in terms of delivering value to its customers? That's a very big question. I'm just interested, you know, how would you rank it?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because it's going to dovetail into what's been said already about customer servicing. So for the last 6 months, for the first time in my life, really, I've been really thinking carefully about my pensions and you know, what I've actually got in terms of wealth. If you've worked in big corporates and maybe moved between different corporates, you'll probably have some form of, you know, corporate pension scheme. And if you think about how they service you through your life, it's absolutely dreadful, because what typically happens, especially ones from more than 10 years ago, you'll get the one piece of paper a year if you're lucky, that will give you a valuation. Some of them don't even do that, right? They'll just be a very generic statement, say, oh, we're fully funded, you don't have to worry about us not being able to pay you when you retire. I mean come on. So, and I think when you're in big corporate, you kind of don't care about it actually. Oh, I've got a pension, it'll be fine. But for the last 6 months, I've been really looking and caring about what my real value is and what I'm able to pass on to my kids and what I'm able to live on for however long I carry on living, right? I really think that is an area that can be radically changed. What I've done is what a lot of people have done, although probably not a high percentage, is to consolidate everything, right? Here's my pension that I got when I started in GEC 32 years ago. Here's this pension from Nomura, 10 years worth. Thank you very much. It's a defined benefit. Brilliant. And tried to bring all these together in one vehicle so I can really see the value of those assets and start to influence some of what I want to achieve from it as well, rather than just be the recipient of a bit of paper, maybe every year. I'm now actually spending time to look, again, through an IFA, Sarah, a bit like you have to, unlike you have to pay for mine. But
I have to in many, many ways, trust me.
But now I'm taking a real active interest, a little bit like my son actually. I'm really interested in actually what's my value and what's that going to become? What's the risk associated with it as well? What could make it wipe out if something goes wrong? So just as a concrete example, I've allocated some of my wealth into gold because I think we're at that tipping point at the moment where things are going to go horribly wrong. And, you want to be across a number of different asset classes, not just your traditional equities and bonds. You want things that have got value. I'm not brave enough to do a big allocation into Bitcoin, though, like my son.
Well, you've already got family members diversifying for you.
Indeed.
So it's fine. So are you going to, out of 10, it sounds like you're going sub 5?
Yeah, most definitely. I think, especially when I think of, people that are thinking about their pensions or not because they're just ignorant to them, we're definitely sub 5. So, a 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Trevor, what would you give them? The industry for looking after customers and their wealth.
I was hoping you'd go to Sarah next. So I find it very hard because you're almost asking me to mark my own homework. So I'm too embedded within the structure. So I think, and maybe I've been fortunate with the organisation that I'm currently working from and others. I do think there has been a focus on trying to do the right thing for the end investor or thinking about the investor. I think the approach is right. But I do think that because of the intermediated chain, it's been very hard to get close enough to actually get that feedback to actually be able to truly say how well are you doing or not. So I think on the basis that we haven't solved how to work with our partners to get that feedback and to analyze it, I don't think I can mark it. But clearly we're not doing a great job because we wouldn't be having the conversation now.
So you've got to be edging above 5, aren't you? I'm going to pin you to 6. Is that okay?
6.5. Go on.
Okay. So go on, Sarah. You look. You're not strictly outside in, are you? You've got a vested interest in there too. So what's your ranking?
I'd say sub 5. I really would. And I think the example that Trevor cited earlier of I get a piece of paper once a year. Well, firstly, the fact that it's paper and nothing's allowed via email. Come on, guys, we're in 2020 here. I'd go back to what I said before. I don't feel as if I have it. So take my husband out of the equation. Prior to knowing him, I voted with my feet, and the onus was very much on me to take an active interest in anything finance related for me. And then after having children, of course, I have even more of a vested interest in how well we're doing or not. I still feel that because of the style and type and content of communications that I receive, whether directly or indirectly, I don't understand it. Luckily I have an in-house translator, but fundamentally I don't understand it. I find the amount of paperwork and heavily detailed documentation overwhelming and intimidating. And I don't feel I know sufficiently what I'm actually buying into. And I think that, with my marketing hat on, I think that people are increasingly interested in, what do you stand for as an organisation? Who are you? And I feel as if I'm way far away from that with any of the financial institutions that I'm indirectly linked into. So it feels as if a distance relationship has an opportunity to become closer where appropriate, but also to become better informed on both sides of the fence, by the way. I think there's a feedback loop that feels as if it's currently missing somewhat between that end user and then the often complex supply chain within the industry.
Sub 5. Okay.
Sub 5.
Andy, you and I, we're going to retain our independence on this one, I'm afraid. So we're not allowed votes. But it looks like the jury's...
Could I give it an analogy, though?
A
creative analogy before the break. I'm reminded of a story about there's a mechanical watch that was made by a Swiss chap, Horologica. I can't remember whoever makes watches, I don't know. And it's beautiful. It's got all these lovely working parts, and it's taken apart by a fleet of engineers, and they all build it together. And it consistently tells the time 59 minutes to the hour. So that's how I would see it. So you've got this industry that's incredibly good at looking after itself, and it does a brilliant job, and it ticks its own boxes, and it hits its own standards, and it makes sure that it's legal and compliant and reassuring and professional, and people are employed to keep the machine working.
Yeah.
But it's a minute out. So there's a whole set of folk just on the outside of it, and perhaps on the inside of it too, who are frustrated that it could be a whole lot better.
Excellent. Well, look, let's take a break. We can wrap up for a moment, and in the next session we'll have a quick quiz. And I'm not sure there'll be prizes, and we won't necessarily have first, second, and third, but have a quick quiz and then wrap up with a few tough questions. So thank you, guests. As scheduled, we've passed our hour. And we've heard from the experts inside out, and then both outside in as well, the provocations and the perspectives there. We had a little bit of a scorecard as well. So we were, unfortunately, the average was probably ranking just under 5 out of 10. So that's work to do, I think, is a polite summary. So ready for the second half of the podcast. And I thought we've got 2 key things that I'd like to do to wrap up. We'll have a little quiz. It's more about, it's not really a knowledge quiz. We're not talking mastermind, but I just thought to set some of the context as well. And then maybe 1 or 2 big questions just to try and wrap things up and to see the direction of travel for the whole series. So if everyone's happy, I'll kick off. And Andy, just so you know, I know that you are my glamorous assistant, but you're in this quiz, I'm afraid. So
I'm in the quiz.
I'll keep the glasses on. It might give you that extra
added intellect.
That brings my IQ up to double figures. Okay, I'm ready for the quiz.
Okie dokie. So look, I'm not going to keep count. I think it's have I got news for you, or something where the score is impenetrable. Nobody knows exactly how the scores work, so there won't be one. But let's have a look. So let me start off with this is a We actually at 6.6, we commissioned YouGov to carry out some detailed research with 537 decision makers across a range of private sector firms about custom software. You talked earlier about customization and specific solutions to problems. And I just wanted to, so I'm going to give you 3 reasons for looking at customization, and I want you to rank them, highest to lowest. So I'm going to give you, and this is, but these are decision makers across a range of private sector firms. So there's improved customer experience. We've talked about that. Solving process automation, and also solving a specific problem, which is quite a generic point, but it was one of the topics. Anyone want to volunteer what they think is the most important reason for customized software?
Process.
So I think the answer will be fundamentally different depending on the job title of the participant.
Okay.
So my answer as a CMO would be fundamentally different to the legal director or the procurement director or the CFO or the CTO.
That sounds like you don't know.
Well, of course I don't know the absolute answer, but it does raise the question around, you know, the decision-making ecosystem around investing in customizable tech.
And Trevor, you said process, yeah?
Yeah, the middle one. So that was B. So in ranking of order, if one's the top, B, C, A.
Okay, so customer experience at the bottom.
Yeah.
Andy,
So
go on, Trevor.
Oh no, go on, Andy first.
I've done the average here, so Sarah's point probably true, but I imagine having asked all 537 and you took all the average answers, it went specific problem came in highest, solving process automation came in the middle, and unfortunately in last position, improving customers' experience was seen as the lowest priority.
Okay.
That's exactly what I've put backwards.
Oh, look. Okay.
So 1, 2, 3. Aspirationally, for me personally, it would be the other way around.
Mr. Hunt?
Exactly. You want to sort of flip them over. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've come from a world where it was 3, 2, 1, and we're going into a world where it's 1, 2, 3. If I think about custom development, that always, you know, oh, we've got this specific problem, we've got to develop this software to do that. That was always the case, that some software developer had the answer to it. So I'll go and solve this specific problem by developing an application. But I think we're going into a world where it's the other way around, where actually customer experience is number one. And interestingly, I shared this with you, Chris. There was a Gartner survey about this with CTOs on Monday. So it comes to Sarah's point about depends who's answering. But CTOs are saying customer experience is number one. And I think this whole digital transformation narrative, whatever it is trying to force that wholesale change so that we do become much more customer centric. So you've got to improve the customer experience to do that. Process automation, yes. There's a fundamental change in technology that's going on at the moment, and part of the reason that I'm working now at Behind Every Cloud is there's a shift from CapEx to OpEx. And sorry to be financial and technical, but it used to be the case that you would invest in software or hardware and you'd amortize it over 3 years, right? You'd go, right, we got this big investment decision about a new CRM system or a new client facing system, a web portal or whatever. I'm going to buy this software, going to buy this hardware, and I'll amortize it over 3 to 5 years. But there's been a shift, and it's been brought about by cloud organizations like Salesforce, where you don't have to do that anymore. What you have to do, what you can do is switch to an OpEx model where you just decide how much you're going to consume every month. And if it's no good, you can swap it for something else. Yeah. So for the need for custom software that's for a specific problem, it's really disappearing, and you can probably just buy it in some form from somewhere.
Well, I have to give 5 gold stars to all of you. You absolutely saw all the way through, and I think, Trevor, your summary there was inspired, because you're absolutely right. Improving customer experience was voted 49% and was the lowest. Process automation was just a nudge ahead at 50%, and solving a specific problem was 75%. So your point about, changing from one paradigm to the other, that's where we want to go. Perfect. So quickly moving on. This is quite a simple question. According to Boston Consulting Group, BCG, financial services firms are how many more times likely than other companies to be targeted in a cyber attack? So we haven't really talked about people looking after your money, but this is part of that point. So I'm just interested to know, how more risky, and the clues in the question, it is more risky, I'm not giving you a dud, to attack by a cyber criminal or a cyber attack. Andy, go on, give me a number. How many more times?
Again, compared to what? So the industry norm is X.
Yes.
So I'm saying 5 times more likely.
5
times more likely to be attacked than the industry standard normal.
A different sector, yeah. Mr.
Yeah,
Hunt.
I'll up that. I'd say
It's higher or lower, isn't it? Where's Bruce?
I'd say 25 times.
25.
Yeah.
Sarah.
I'm going to say
Higher or lower?
18. I'm going to say 18. It's not as low as Andy.
That sounds like a canny guess. Mr. Goodman?
10.
10. The number is 300.
Good God.
Wow.
300.
Terrifying.
So if we
I was close.
just
But in all seriousness, can I challenge that? Because maybe other industries aren't reporting enough or don't have the same type of monitoring and systems required that regulators force the industry to do. So I agree, it's definitely going to be more, but whether it truly is the 300, I would query that.
I think
what would be interesting to know, Chris, and I it wasn't necessarily why you did it, but it's just building on Trevor's point, the difference between regulated and non-regulated industries. So clearly, as with financial services, telecoms is another really, really obvious target, and we saw pain that people like Carphone Warehouse went through a couple of years ago as a result in terms of poor cybersecurity and therefore dreadful reputational damage.
I mean, I think there's Verizon who produce a regular data breach report across all industries. 35% of all attacks, which is the second most likely cause of attacks, are actually coming from internal errors and mistakes. But I think the reason I bring it up is simply that, on one hand, financial services firms are, to a greater or lesser extent, custodians of your money. And you obviously, there's a safety and security aspect that I think is worth considering. That they may have to look after your money, and therefore you'd like them to be as secure as possible. So that's one of the key reasons I brought it up. I have another. Let's have a quick final question on advice. In fact, so Sarah, you might have an advantage here.
Might have a skewed view.
So, according to Boring Money, which is a good research outfit in the UK focusing on advice in particular, there are 14.5 million active investors. In other words, people who have made an active decision to invest something. And we're not just talking about employee pension schemes where you just ticked a box or didn't tick a box. These are people who have actually gone out to make an investment, 14.5 million. And if you ignore those who have used, the platform on that workplace pension, how many of them do you think are non-advised or effectively self-service? So I'm just interested in that proportion that you think are non-advised, who have gone out and just gone to a platform, gone their own way. Andy, you're probably one of those, aren't you? Are you adding up from one?
I've got my answer. I'm ready to go.
Well, no, look, you went first last time.
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm ready to go.
So I look, since everyone was working from your benchmark last time, I'm going to start with Sarah, because she was canniest last time. Go on, Sarah, what do you think?
I'm going to say 10.
10 million. So the majority of those are non-advised, yeah?
Yeah.
Trevor G?
I'm struggling with this one because I think that the people who are investing, by and large, are advised, because I think the people who don't have advice don't invest. So I think the majority of people who are going through are advised. I think it's a much smaller proportion.
Much smaller.
Yeah, it's hard to put a number on it, but I think the majority.
5 or so, or 3, or
in terms of millions. I'd say, I don't know, I'm just going to go 10 again. I've got no feel for it.
Trevor?
I think I'll up it a little bit because I think there's more non-advised. I think there's more people just sitting there passively taking what they get given, and there's only a few million who really care and are actually doing anything about it. So I'd up it to 12.
Okay. Andy? Nobody's got the right answer yet. You can shine right now.
Well, I'll give you the answer and how I did it, which is I imagined people like me sitting in front of the nutmegs of the world, or scanning their smartphones in the pub. Do you remember pubs? Talking to their friends and saying, "What have you done?" And I've done this, and sort of following advice vicariously through their social network. So 35% of 14 million was 5 million.
So just over a third.
Yeah, about a third of them went, "I'm going to do that," and they pressed the button or did that on their phone or something. Yeah.
Well, the scary answer is actually the reverse, Andy. It's 11 million of them are not advised, and that amounts to 76%.
Wow.
So 14.5 million active investors seems too low to me anyway, as a principle, and over 3/4 of them are non-advised as well.
But that's really interesting in and of itself.
Yes.
In terms of where decision making sits, when people are given the freedom to do so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Guess how many people have got a financial advisor?
Go on.
9%.
So 9% of that 14 million,
of
and 9%
that
of all
14.
of us.
Yeah, of investors, 9%. I mean, this is across the board. So 1 in 10. It's because you can get advice in obviously different forms, but only 9% in financial advisors. So I just thought that's interesting questions, and I'll quickly sneak in one more because this is a scary number. The Resolution Foundation think tank. So this is a survey that was done very recently. So a typical worker in a shut down sector of the economy, so obviously struggling right now. They've got an average savings pot of how much? Anybody care to guess? Go on, Andy.
I'm going to say high hundreds.
High hundreds.
All I can to be sensitive, insightful, realistic, and not offensive. I'm going to say they've got high hundreds or low thousands.
Yeah, it's £1,900.
Wow.
And the point is that's dwindling now. They're using that up.
Yeah.
People who are able to work from home, and the majority of us, are blessed in that capacity. They are 4,700 savings, and a third of those, the pot is going up. because they're not commuting, they're not doing it. So it's, COVID is heightening a have and have not. Yeah. And if there's a mantra that we might want to fix, it's one of those. So that just heightens that. So look,
and as a feature of our ongoing chats, Chris, can the factoids, the quiz, be an essential part of each episode? Because that definitely humanizes the impact of our topics of conversation and where things can lead. So perhaps a measure of success of Wealth 4.0, when it's up and running and people are feeling benefits from it in 48 months' time, is that we haven't got a great deal of the population sitting on £1,900. That maybe more of us have taken some educated, independent financial advice in whatever form that is.
Agreed.
These are figures that could be perhaps changed and seen as impacts of our endeavours.
And I think
I'd say for future ones of these, we should have that on a slide, and you reveal it, right? A bit of animation, and you reveal it. Then it makes it more than conversation. It's a bang. This is the fact. This is the fact. When you advertise it, when you publish it anywhere, you have the slide showing.
I nearly hired a selection of local children to hold up billboards with the answers, but that would have
been their combined maths and art lesson at the same time. And PE.
Homeschooling at its best.
But anyway, I've got some final, and actually, I mean, the one thing I will say that as part of the series, as well as these almost KPIs, is I'm really keen that we bring in data-led insights. I'm keen that it's not, opinions are founded in fact, or at least the best information we have at the time. Because, apart from the adage about, what's measured gets managed, or vice versa, we want to be able to capture these elements in fact and then move forward from those foundations. That's one of the key things I see. So I'm going to end with, the last 5 minutes of provocation. I've listed them as big questions. I think that's probably just because I used a large font, but I'll try and I'll throw some of these at you, which I think will be quite interesting. So from a disruption point of view, we all know about various acronyms, GAFA or Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. What's stopping them from entering the wealth market? From a disruption point of view, wouldn't they just take over and show the incumbents how to do it? Trevor?
Go on.
You're ready. You're agog with an answer. I can see you.
So it's already happened in some jurisdictions, hasn't it? It's happened in China. I think it's happening in India as well. Those economies that have sort of taken a bit of a leapfrog away from that paper onto digital are already doing it. Now, the question of those organizations entering the market has been out there for, 10 years or more. Everyone's been waiting for it to happen, but it hasn't. So there must be a reason why they haven't. Otherwise, it would have happened already. It could be barriers to entry, but it may just be that it's not profitable enough for them to actually want to. Jeff Bezos doesn't want to do it, right? He's got better markets and verticals to enter when compared to wealth management. So, having said that, who knows? Tomorrow there might be an announcement from whoever about what they're doing. I mean, last weekend it was all about payments over WhatsApp in Brazil. The local regulator shuts it down straight away. But these things are happening by the day, by the week. So interesting times ahead.
Sarah, what do you think as your alma mater? Why?
So fundamentally, the the sort of mission of Google around giving everybody access to information globally means that any endeavor since launch, since search, since YouTube, since Android OS, since enterprise apps, since Moonshot, since driverless cars, have all fitted into that in some way. So philosophically, entering the market would fit with that in terms of centralized access to one's own financial information in a centralized space. But it kind of goes back to the conversation we had about half an hour ago around the challenge and intricacies of integrating massive numbers of multi-layered different systems, which wouldn't necessarily sit and therefore be sufficiently profitable with the existing Google stack.
And Mr. Goodman, have you got a...
And actually, emotionally, I don't think they would find it that exciting.
Do you, I mean...
Candidly.
And Trevor, just earlier you mentioned, China, Asia, etc. Is that the direction of travel? Is that where we should be looking for the is the center of gravity moving to Asia, and is that where the disruption and innovation is going to come from? What do you think, Trevor? G.
Yeah, I mean, I just going back to the big tech piece, I think you're more likely to see, rather than the big techs actually jumping in and doing it themselves, some form of sort of partnership or testing the water, some form of collaboration where, and I've always believed that the question that those at the top of asset management companies need to be asking is, are they a technology company that does asset management or an asset management company that uses technology really well? And I think when you ask that question and work out strategically what that means, then it probably drives you into, I think, having to collaborate with one of the big techs in terms of how do you get bespoke product out to end retail investors? What do you need to do that? So I think I can see that happening in more of a collaboration rather than a Google or a Facebook or wherever actually owning that particular sort of industry or approach. I think obviously from a demographic perspective, there are other countries with more people and more wealth probably based on their economies to actually invest, so they become more interesting as things become a new sort of wealth creation group is created. But then you'll probably, sorry to answer your question, I think this is where I'm struggling to answer, you're looking at a change in superpowers, away from sort of American-led global society to one that's led by one of those emerging countries, and it's more likely to be China than, say, India or Brazil or whoever it is. So I think you're asking some very big questions there, and I'm certainly not qualified to answer them.
No, I listened to a commentary as well this morning, which talked about disruption in industry, and said there's a interesting point, the dynamics around large, i.e., incumbents or those with investments, and versus fast. So can the large players speed up in certain ways to compete against fast? And I guess in our industry, that's captured by the term fintech, amongst others. And I think that's an interesting dynamic to really see. And I'll be very excited to talk about lessons from other industries around disruption. How we've seen that play out and what's worked. We're seeing it live at the moment with the coronavirus, and we've seen it before with Netflix and Blockbuster and Kodak and all of those sort of names. So it's fascinated. That was just one of the. You're right, Trevor. It was a big question, potentially unfair, but that's why we're here. Andy, have you got any?
Sorry to ask me that one, and I'm just a lawyer that's worked within the industry. I don't claim to have any expertise around demographics and world change. So
I fear I've done that to you twice now, so I have to apologise. But anyway, Andy, I don't know if you've got any, in terms of sort of wrapping up and where we're going, have you got any final thoughts from your side?
My final thoughts are, I end as I began with a thank you. The time has flown, it really has. And we've covered a tremendous amount of starter conversations. We went off a bit like a fireworks night, all going off in different places. We've covered communication, we've covered the moving mechanics of the industry. We talked about customer insight, relationship to customer communication. Then there was untouched topics that I know we'll probably want to visit in the future about risk, security, culture, reputation, all of that. So what I'm seeing is that there's a lot there to cover. I'm excited that where a conversation that you and I had years ago has now grown into something that other people are involved with. And to reiterate, this isn't just a chat that we're going to have for several weeks and then it lives as a sort of box series for people to listen to and then sits in some hard drive in perpetuity forever. The intention is to do this once so that we're heading towards a blueprint that we can present to the world, that people invest in, for want of a better verb, people can sign up to and want to get involved with, so that it makes the world a better place. And I'm excited by that. And genuinely, let's not waste a good crisis at the moment. Certainly some of my clients have managed to do things that would have been an anathema under normal circumstances, and in a matter of days and sometimes weeks, they've managed to shift their entire businesses online or offline or into people's homes. And it's amazing what people can do when they put their minds to it and they don't use excuses. So I'm excited by this. I've got lots to do, and I really look forward to the next episodes where we can speak to other people to thrash around these topics and end up with something exciting to launch. That was a long answer to say a simple thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. I entirely appreciate your time, your effort, your insights, and your chairs. And I look forward to having you involved in future episodes, because I think you've all been fantastic and I owe you plenty. So thank you very much. I'll be in touch. You can sign off now and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you,
Take
Sarah.
care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Trevor.
Thank
Thank you, Trevor.
See you. Cheers.